What if Trump thought he was bringing Xi closer to America, but actually helped turn Beijing into the room Putin had to enter? Trump came first. Putin followed. Xi stayed where he was, and that is the part that matters, because suddenly Beijing did not look like a country choosing sides. It looked like the room both sides had to enter. So the real story may not be that Xi is returning to America. It may be that Xi is moving the center of the game to Beijing. And if that is true, Putin's visit was not just a show of strength. It was proof that the room may have changed. And if the room changed, you are already paying for it. Because this is not just diplomacy. When the room changes, the bill changes too. Let me start with the facts. On May 15, 2026, Donald Trump arrived in Beijing for a summit with Xi Jinping. It was the first time an American president had visited Beijing for a formal summit in 9 years. Reuters reported the meeting. The Council on Foreign Relations analyzed it. Both said roughly the same thing. Big on symbolism, light on substance. Trump left with warm words for Xi. He left without major breakthroughs on trade. He left without clear Chinese commitments on Iran. He left without a resolution on Taiwan. But here is what did not leave with him. You remember when world leaders came to America. You remember when the White House set the agenda. You remember when Washington was the room. Not because America was perfect, but because America controlled the geography of power. That geography is not the same in May 2026. Now let me add the second fact. 4 days after Trump left Beijing, Vladimir Putin arrived. May 19th and 20th. Reuters reported it. The Guardian confirmed the timing. Reuters noted it was Putin's 25th trip to China. This was not a one-off diplomatic gesture. This was a relationship, a deeply established pattern. Chinese state media described Beijing as a focal point of global diplomacy. Not Moscow, not Washington, Beijing. The location of a meeting is not just logistics. In geopolitics, the location is the message. When both Trump and Putin enter Beijing within days of each other, something invisible happens. Beijing stops looking like a country choosing sides. It starts looking like the room both sides must enter. There is a difference between those two things. A country choosing sides is a player in the game. A room that everyone must enter is something else entirely. It is the table itself. Now you might be thinking, does it really matter where the meetings happen? In the short term, maybe not. In the long term, location shapes perception. Perception shapes access. Access shapes who gets heard when the next crisis arrives. And the next crisis, as you are about to see, may already be here. But here's the part that matters. The shift did not happen just because Putin flew to Beijing. It may have happened because Trump flew there first. And that is where the story gets more complicated. Let me be clear about what Trump wanted from Beijing. Trade. More market access for American goods. China's help calming the oil markets disrupted by the Iran conflict. Some movement on Taiwan, or at least a reduction in risk. Cooperation on rare earths. Supply chain stability. These are all reasonable American interests. None of them are unreasonable to want. Reuters reported that Trump left Beijing with warm public language for Xi. The Council on Foreign Relations described the summit as symbolically significant but limited in substance. In plain terms, Trump wanted outcomes. He got a photo. Now here is where the hidden mechanism enters the picture. Every American president who meets with Xi does something that cannot be undone. He gives the meeting the prestige of the American presidency. That prestige is real. It has weight. It signals to the world, China is a country the United States takes seriously enough to visit in person, at the highest level. And for Xi, That signal had an audience that was not in the room. Moscow. Think about what Putin saw when Trump's summit images circulated across the world. He saw that Xi had something both superpowers now want. He saw that China was not trapped in Russia's corner. He saw that China had direct access to Washington at the highest level. And he saw that if he wanted to remain relevant in this new architecture, he needed to be in Beijing too. Not because Putin had no choice, but because the summit showed him where the room was. Call it status conversion. Trump came to open a channel. Xi may have turned that channel into a stage. Not necessarily by scheming, not through some master plan that was drawn up years in advance, but through positioning. Because when you host the American president and then the Russian president in the same week, you are not just a player in the game, you look like the house the game is played in. Now do not misread this. Xi does not control Trump. Xi does not control Putin. That is not the claim. The claim is narrower and more important. The claim is this: Beijing is becoming harder to bypass. And in a world where American foreign policy runs on the ability to pressure, isolate, and contain, harder to bypass is a structural problem. Because here is the part that matters. Once that stage exists, America's old tools start to look different. America is still the most powerful country on earth. Say that loudly, because this video is not a collapse story. America has the world's largest military. America holds the world's reserve currency. America commands alliances spanning Europe, Asia, and the Pacific. America controls the architecture of international banking and sanctions. These are not small things. They are the infrastructure of global power. But infrastructure has a weakness. It works best when there are no alternatives. The U.S. sanction system works best when cutting someone off from American markets, American banks, and American dollars means cutting them off from the world economy. That model was nearly total in the 1990s. It was still powerful in 2014 after Crimea. But in 2022, something changed. Russia was hit with the most comprehensive Western sanctions package in modern history. Swift removal, asset freezes, oil price caps, export controls, travel bans, and yet Russia's economy did not collapse. Why? Because China kept a door open. Reuters reported that China became an economic lifeline for Russia after Western sanctions took hold. Chinese buyers absorbed Russian oil. Chinese companies sold Russia the goods it could no longer get from the West: cars, electronics, machinery, components. And the payment system adapted. Reuters also reported that nearly all trade between Russia and China is now settled in rubles and yuan, not dollars, which means the financial pressure America can apply through dollar-based systems reaches less of that trade than it used to. Now look at the numbers. China and Russia traded $244.8 billion worth of goods in 2024. That was a record. In 2025, that number declined slightly to somewhere between $228 and $234 billion, depending on how you calculate it. Still historically enormous, still bigger than almost any trade relationship either country had with each other a decade ago. And here is the mechanism you need to hold on to. Old model: America closes doors. Countries have nowhere else to go. New model: China opens alternative doors. Countries have somewhere else to go. Sanctions still hurt. That needs to be said clearly. Russia is under real economic pressure. The ruble has been volatile. Inflation has been high. Skilled workers have emigrated. Defense costs are bleeding the state budget. But a sanction that hurts is one thing. A sanction that breaks you is another. The difference between those two outcomes may be China. This is where old power meets new geography. When America has to bargain instead of simply pressure, every crisis gets more expensive. More resources, more years, more of your tax money, more of your children's exposure to military risk, more volatility in the retirement accounts you spent decades building. Sanctions work best when there is no second door. China is becoming the second door, and that second door matters most when Putin is the one walking through it. Here is something that often gets missed in discussions of Putin and China. Putin did not need China to save Russia. He needed China to keep Russia from being alone. That is a smaller ask, and it is one China can fulfill without going to war, without formally breaking Western sanctions, and without officially choosing sides. China just needs to keep trading, keep buying Russian oil, keep selling Russian imports, keep the yuan flowing where the dollar cannot reach. That is enough. AP reported that Russia's oil exports to China rose 35% in the first quarter of 2026 alone. 35% in one quarter. Russia is now China's third largest LNG supplier, delivering nearly 9.8 million metric tons of liquefied natural gas in 2025, up more than 18% from the year before. Russia supplied China with 38.8 billion cubic meters of natural gas through the Power of Siberia pipeline in 2025. These are not symbolic numbers. These are cash flows. And cash flows matter when you are running a war economy with a budget under pressure. Now here is the American angle on all of this. If China keeps Russia's back door open, how long does America have to keep paying to contain Russia? Every year that Russia is not fully broken by sanctions is a year America spends more. More on Ukraine support, more on NATO reassurance commitments, more on military deterrence in Eastern Europe, more on sanctions enforcement teams and legal infrastructure. That is real money. It comes from real budgets. It competes with roads, hospitals, schools, and retirement programs. The cost of containment is not just moral or strategic. It is fiscal. And if China keeps even one major door open for Russia, that fiscal cost stretches. It does not end quickly. It does not end cleanly. Here is something worth sitting with. America can close one door, but China can keep another one open. That is not a new dynamic. China has been doing this since 2022. But what the May 2026 summit sequence made visible is this. Putin knows it, Xi knows it, and now Trump knows it too. Which is why, when you understand that open door, the next piece makes even more sense. Because the clearest symbol of that open door is not a diplomatic handshake. It is a pipeline. There is a project that has been discussed, delayed, renegotiated, and stalled for years. It is called Power of Siberia 2. If built, it would carry approximately 50 billion cubic meters of Russian natural gas per year from Siberia into China, routed through Mongolia. To put that in perspective, that volume is comparable to what Nord Stream once carried from Russia into Europe. Before the war, the sanctions and the explosions in the Baltic changed everything. Europe used to be Russia's best gas customer. That relationship is effectively over. Russia lost its most lucrative energy market virtually overnight. For Moscow, that created a desperate need for a new long-term energy buyer. Enter China. Reuters reported that Xi and Putin were expected to focus on energy cooperation during the May 2026 summit, including Power of Siberia 2. But here is the catch. Power of Siberia 2 is still under negotiation. It has not been finalized. It has been stalled for years by one issue above all others: price. Reuters also reported that China pays roughly 30% less per unit of Russian gas than Europe and Turkey once paid. 30% less. Russia needs the pipeline. China knows Russia needs it, so China waits. This is not a betrayal between friends. This is market power in its purest form. If you are the only buyer large enough to replace an entire continent's worth of demand, you get to set the terms. And this is the mechanism most coverage misses. Power of Siberia 2 is not just a gas story. It is a story about who has patience. Russia needs the deal relatively soon to shore up long-term revenues and prove the pivot east is working. China needs it eventually, but can afford to wait. When one side needs the deal and the other controls the terms, that is not partnership. That is structural dependence. Russia is becoming energy dependent on a single buyer. That buyer is Xi Jinping. Now here is the American angle. If Russia can reroute even part of its energy future through China, and the existing pipeline is already carrying 38.8 billion cubic meters a year, with plans to reach 56 billion by 2027 through combined routes, then U.S. sanctions cannot fully choke Moscow's long-term cash flow. That means the pressure campaign stretches. The Russia problem does not resolve quickly. It lasts. And when a geopolitical problem lasts, who pays? Not just soldiers, not just diplomats, ordinary people, through energy prices, through defense spending, through inflation, through higher taxes competing with higher military budgets. This pipeline is not about Russian gas. It is about whether Russia can reroute its future around the West. If Russia can do that, America's Russia problem does not shrink. It stretches. And while Russia is looking for a route around the West, Xi is building something bigger than a pipeline. He is building a room. Here is what Trump needed from Beijing when he arrived. Help calming the oil markets disrupted by the Iran conflict, movement on trade, China's influence over rare earth supply chains, some form of stability on Taiwan, cooperation on technology and agriculture. These are not trivial asks. The numbers behind them are enormous. U.S.-China goods trade totaled an estimated $414.7 billion in 2025. America imported $308.4 billion worth of Chinese goods in that single year. And China supplied 70% of all rare earth compounds and metals that America imported between 2020 and 2023. 70%. Those rare earths go into defense systems, into electric vehicles, into the chips inside every smartphone and laptop and medical device your family uses. So yes, America had reasons to be in Beijing. Real, material, economic reasons, not soft diplomatic ones. Now here is what Putin needed from Beijing. Energy buyers for Russian oil and gas, markets for Russian exports, payment channels outside the Western financial system, diplomatic cover, proof to the world that Russia is not isolated, and proof to his own people that Russia still commands respect. Different needs, same destination. Here is the mechanism. Xi does not have to choose between Trump and Putin. He does not have to pick a side. He has to do something simpler and more structurally powerful. He has to make Beijing the place both sides cannot bypass. And that is exactly what happened in May 2026. When Trump needed oil markets calmed, he went to Beijing. When Putin needed an energy future, he went to Beijing. When the world's two largest competing powers both needed something, they entered the same room. And Xi stayed in the chair. There is a principle in negotiation that most experienced people understand instinctively. The most powerful person at the table is not always the one who speaks the loudest. Sometimes it is the one who owns the room. The most powerful country in the world is not always the one with the largest military. Sometimes it is the one that everyone has to visit. That is not a statement about American military power. America still commands the most powerful armed forces on Earth by every measurable metric. But room power is a different kind of power. It is the power of being unavoidable. And unavoidable is what Beijing is quietly becoming. Not in every situation, not in every crisis, but in enough situations that the geometry of global decision-making is shifting. Not dramatically, not overnight, but measurably. Washington used to be the room. Beijing is becoming a second room. And when there are two rooms, the cost of entry goes up for everyone who used to charge the rent. When the room changes, the bill changes too. And Americans are already paying that bill. Let me get specific. Let me get personal. This week, The week Trump met Xi and Putin met Xi, the average price of a gallon of regular gasoline in the United States was between $4.49 and $4.53. AAA reported it. The Energy Information Administration confirmed it. Oil prices are elevated because of active risk around the Iran conflict and serious concerns about the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow passage through which roughly 20% of the world's seaborne oil travels. Reuters reported that oil prices jumped more than 3% on May 15th alone, on fears of U.S.-Iran combat and direct threats to Hormuz shipping lanes. Brent crude was trading near $111 per barrel on May 19th. WTI, West Texas Intermediate, the American benchmark, settled near $107. These are not background statistics. These are the numbers behind the price you pay every time you fill the tank. Now, let me connect the chain. If China continues to absorb Russian oil at scale, and Russia's exports to China rose 35% in just the first quarter of this year, then Russia keeps funding its military operation in Ukraine. If Russia keeps fighting, America and its allies keep spending. Defense budgets stay elevated. NATO commitments remain high. Ukraine support packages continue to move through Congress. Where does that money come from? It competes with every domestic priority your government manages. Infrastructure, healthcare, Social Security solvency, veterans programs, public education. Every dollar spent maintaining a longer than necessary pressure campaign against Russia is a dollar not spent somewhere else. Now add the supply chain dimension. China supplied 70% of rare earth compounds and metals imported by the United States over a 3-year span. Those materials go into the defense systems that protect American service members, into the motors of the next generation of vehicles, into the circuit boards of devices your grandchildren are growing up with. If relations with China become transactional and strained, while China simultaneously supports Russia's economic survival, America faces 2 pressure points at once, and every American household eventually feels both. Through inflation on goods that move through Chinese supply chains, through higher energy prices when Middle East risks spike, through higher taxes competing with a growing defense budget, through volatility in the retirement accounts you spent decades building. This is not a scare story. It is a chain. Geopolitics connects to energy. Energy connects to inflation. Inflation connects to interest rates. Interest rates connect to mortgages. Mortgages connect to your monthly payment. Your monthly payment connects to every other decision you make. When America negotiated primarily from Washington, it largely controlled that chain. When America has to negotiate in Beijing or anywhere else, the chain gets more links. More links mean more friction. More friction means more cost. And here is the hardest question of all. The question this entire video has been building toward. If both America and Russia now have to enter Xi's room to solve their most pressing problems, who really controls what comes next? Not the handshake, not the press conference, not the joint statement about cooperation and mutual benefit. The deal that sets energy prices for the next decade. The deal that determines whether the Iran standoff escalates into something that closes Hormuz for weeks. The deal that shapes rare earth supply for American defense industries for the next generation. The deal that decides how long the Russia problem lasts and what it costs to contain. That question does not have a clean answer yet. But the fact that it is being asked at all, the fact that the room has changed enough to make that question possible, that is the story of May 2026. Trump came to Beijing looking for a channel. He wanted China's help on trade, on Iran, on Taiwan, on the supply chains that American industry depends on. Putin came to Beijing looking for an open door. He wanted China's energy markets, its payment systems, its diplomatic cover, the minimum he needs to survive Western pressure without being completely alone. But Xi may have been selling something bigger than any of that. He may have been selling the room itself. Not through military force, not through economic coercion that any law could easily name, but through unavoidability, through becoming the place you cannot solve the problem without. America is not finished. Do not misread this. The dollar is still the world's reserve currency. American alliances are still the deepest and widest on earth. The American military remains without equal. But the world in May 2026 looks different from the world of 1995 or 2005 or even 2015. In those years, the room was in Washington, almost exclusively. In May 2026, two of the world's most powerful leaders flew to Beijing within 4 days of each other, and Xi stayed where he was. That does not mean America lost, but it may mean America is no longer the only country that owns a room. And when more than one country owns a room, the negotiations get longer, the prices get higher, and the bill gets passed, as it always does, to ordinary people, at the gas station, at the grocery store, in the tax bill, in the defense budget, in the retirement account statement that arrives when you least expect volatility. When the room changes, the bill changes too. That is not a partisan statement. It is not an anti-American statement. It is the oldest principle in geopolitics. Power is not just about who has the weapons. Power is about who has the room. So here is the question to take with you today. If both America and Russia now have to enter Xi's room to solve the world's biggest problems, who really controls what comes next? Leave your answer in the comments below. And if this analysis added something to how you see the world, something the headlines moved past too quickly, share it with someone who deserves to think it through. See you in the next one.